They say blood is thicker than water. That family will always have your back. That when the world turns its back on you, your own flesh and blood will be there to catch you when you fall. But what happens when the person you trusted most, the person who smiled at every family dinner, who hugged you at every birthday, who promised to take care of everything, turns out to be the snake that was waiting to strike? My name is Daniel, and this is the story of how my uncle, my mother's own brother, looked me dead in the eye and told me I wasn't family. How he kicked me out of my dying mother's hospital room, and how I discovered that he had stolen $45 million from the woman who raised me alone, who sacrificed everything for me, and who was now lying in a bed, too weak to even speak. This is a story about betrayal, about greed, about the kind of evil that hides behind a smile and a family name, but it's also a story about revenge. Cold, calculated, and absolutely devastating revenge. Because when I found those papers, when I saw the truth in black and white, I didn't just want justice. I wanted to destroy him. And I did. But let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand how deep this betrayal went. You need to see how a man could look at his dying sister and see nothing but dollar signs. My mother, Catherine, was a force of nature. If you ever met her, you'd know exactly what I mean. She wasn't just strong, she was unstoppable. A woman who built an empire from absolutely nothing. She grew up poor. I mean really poor. The kind of poor where dinner was sometimes just bread and water. Where winter meant choosing between heating the house or having food on the table. Her parents died when she was 17, leaving her and her younger brother, my Uncle Richard, alone in the world. Most people would have crumbled, but not my mom. She worked 3 jobs while putting herself through night school. She saved every penny. She learned everything she could about business, about investing, about building something real, and by the time she was 30, she had started her own company. A small real estate investment firm that she ran out of a tiny office that was barely bigger than a closet. But she had vision. She had drive. And most importantly, she had this incredible ability to see opportunities where others saw nothing within 10 years. That small firm had grown into a massive real estate empire. She was buying properties, developing land, and investing in commercial buildings. She was making deals that some of the biggest players in the city were jealous of. By the time I was born, when she was 38, my mother was worth tens of millions of dollars. And she did it all on her own. No inheritance. No family money. Just pure grit and determination. My father. He left when I was 2. Just walked out one day and never came back. I don't even remember his face. But my mom? She never let his absence define us. She raised me alone, and she made sure I never felt like I was missing anything. She taught me everything. About hard work. About integrity. About treating people with respect regardless of how much money they have. She told me that money was just a tool, was what you did with it that mattered, and through it all. There was one person who was always around. One person my mother trusted completely. Her younger brother. Uncle Richard. Richard had always been different. Where my mom was ambitious and driven, Richard was laid back, comfortable, and never really found his footing in life. Jumped from job to job, failed business venture after failed business venture. But my mom never gave up on him. She loved her little brother. So when he came to her 15 years ago, broke and desperate, she did what she always did. She helped him. She gave him a job in her company. Started him off in property management, handling some of the smaller buildings. Nothing too complicated. Just enough to give him a steady income and some purpose. And Richard, he seemed grateful. He showed up to work. He did his job. He was family, and he was finally stable. Over the years, my mom promoted him, gave him more responsibility, more access. She brought him into her inner circle, let him handle bigger accounts, bigger properties. She even gave him signing authority on some of the company accounts so he could handle day-to-day operations without constantly needing her approval. She trusted him completely. And why wouldn't she? He was her brother, her blood, the only family she had besides me. I was away at college during most of this, studying business, following in my mom's footsteps. She wanted me to learn everything I could, to one day take over the company she had built, and I was determined to make her proud. I came home during breaks, during the summers, and every time I did, Uncle Richard was there, smiling, friendly, always asking about school, about my life. He seemed genuinely happy to see me. Looking back now, I realize he was studying me, figuring out how much I knew, how much of a threat I was to whatever plan he was already putting into motion. But I didn't see it then. None of us did. Everything changed 6 months ago. My mom started feeling sick. At first, she thought it was just stress. She'd been working on a massive development deal, and the hours were brutal. But the symptoms got worse. Fatigue, weight loss, pain that she couldn't ignore anymore. She finally went to the doctor. And that's when our entire world shattered. Stage 4, pancreatic cancer. Aggressive, already spread throughout her body. The doctor gave her 6 months, maybe less. I dropped everything. Left school immediately and came home. I wasn't going to waste a single moment. My mom had spent her entire life taking care of me. Now it was my turn to take care of her. Those first few weeks were a blur. Treatments, hospital visits, trying to keep her comfortable. Trying to pretend like everything was going to be okay even though we both knew the truth. And through it all, Uncle Richard was there constantly. He visited the hospital every day. He brought flowers. He held her hand. He told her everything was going to be fine, that he was handling the business, and that she shouldn't worry about anything. He seemed like the perfect brother, the perfect family member stepping up in a crisis. I should have known better. I should have seen the signs. It was a Tuesday afternoon. 3 months after the diagnosis, my mom had been moved to a private room in the hospital. The treatments weren't working. The doctors had started talking about making her comfortable, about quality of life instead of quantity. I was there every day, sometimes all day and all night. I'd sleep in the chair next to her bed, holding her hand, talking to her even when she was too weak to respond. Uncle Richard came by that afternoon like he always did. But this time, something was different. He seemed agitated, nervous. He kept checking his phone, looking at the door like he was waiting for someone. "Danny," he said, using the nickname I'd always hated, "why don't you go home for a bit? Get some rest." "You've been here for days." I shook my head. "I'm fine. I want to be here." His jaw tightened. "I think you should go. I need to talk to your mother, alone. Business matters." "At business." I stared at him. "She can barely stay awake for more than 10 minutes. "What business could possibly? It's family business," he interrupted. "Adult business." "You wouldn't understand." Something in his tone made my blood run cold. The way he said adult business, it's like I was still a child. Like I had no right to be there. "I'm 23 years old," I said quietly, "and this is my mother. I'm not going anywhere." That's when his mask slipped. Just for a moment, but I saw it. The flash of anger, of something dark and ugly beneath the surface. "You need to leave, now." His voice was hard, cold. "Excuse me." "You heard me. Get out." "This doesn't concern you?" I stood up slowly, my heart pounding. "What are you talking about?" "She's my mother. She's my sister," he snapped. "My family. You're not really family, Daniel. Not the way I am. Not blood the way I am." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Not family? What the hell is wrong with you?" "Your father left, remember?" His smile was cruel now. "Who knows if you're even really her son? Maybe you're just some mistake she made. Maybe get out." My mother's voice was weak, barely a whisper, but we both heard it. She was awake, her eyes barely open, but there was steel in her voice. "Richard, get out." For a second, Uncle Richard looked genuinely shocked, but then his face hardened again. "Fine," he said. "But this conversation isn't over, Catherine. We have things to discuss. Legal things. And Danny," he looked at me one last time, "you should start thinking about your future. Because once she's gone, you're going to find out exactly where you stand." He walked out, and I stood there, shaking with rage and confusion. my mother's frail hand gripping mine with what little strength she had left. "Mom," I whispered. "What was he talking about? What legal things?" But she had already slipped back into sleep, exhausted from even those few words. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. There was something happening that I didn't understand, that my uncle's words weren't just cruel, they were a threat. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, the way he'd looked at me, the way he'd said legal things. And then I remembered something. A few weeks earlier, I'd seen Uncle Richard leaving my mom's hospital room late at night. He'd been carrying a briefcase and had looked startled when he saw me in the hallway. He'd said something about needing her signature on some routine business documents at the time. I hadn't thought much of it. But now, the next morning, while Uncle Richard was at the office, I made a decision. I went to my mother's house, the house I'd grown up in, and I went into her home office. My mom had always been meticulous about her records. Everything was filed, organized, and labeled. But as I started looking through recent documents, I realized that a lot of things were missing. Bank statements, property deeds, investment records. And then I found it. Hidden in the back of a filing cabinet, underneath a stack of old tax returns, a folder labeled Trust Documents Copy. My hands were shaking as I opened it, and what I saw inside made my blood turn to ice. Transferred documents. Dozens of them. Properties are being transferred out of my mother's name. Bank accounts are being closed and moved. Assets are being liquidated. All signed by my mother, or at least signed with her signature. But the dates. The dates were from the last 3 months. From when she was in the hospital, when she could barely hold a pen, when she was barely conscious most days, and every single transfer had one name on it. One beneficiary, Richard Thompson, my uncle. He had stolen everything, systematically, methodically, while my mother was dying in a hospital bed. Her own brother was draining her accounts, transferring her properties, and liquidating her life's work, $40-5 million. That's what I calculated. $45 million stolen from a dying woman by the person she trusted most in the world. I felt sick, literally sick. I ran to the bathroom and threw up, because the betrayal was so deep, so complete, that my brain couldn't even process it. My mother had given him everything: a job, a career, trust, love. And this is how he repaid her? But as I sat there on the bathroom floor, something else started to grow inside me. Something cold and hard and absolutely ruthless. Rage. Pure, focused rage. And a promise. A promise to myself and to my mother. I was going to destroy him. The first thing I did was take pictures of everything. Every document, every signature, every transfer. I documented it all with my phone, making sure I had copies of copies. Then I very carefully put everything back exactly the way I'd found it. Because if Uncle Richard knew I had discovered his scheme, he might panic. He might try to cover his tracks or disappear. I couldn't let that happen. I needed him to feel safe, confident, arrogant, and then was going to bury him. I left my mom's house and went straight to a lawyer. But not just any lawyer. I called Andrew Chen, the attorney who had handled some of my mother's business deals over the years. He knew her. He knew her signature. Most importantly, he hated fraud. When I walked into his office and laid out what I'd found, I watched his face go from shock to disgust to cold fury. "This is forgery," he said quietly, examining the documents. "These signatures... Daniel, I've seen your mother sign hundreds of documents. This isn't her handwriting. Close, but not perfect. Whoever did this practiced, but they made mistakes. Can you prove it?" "With a handwriting expert, absolutely. But we need to move carefully. If we tip him off, we won't," I said. "I need you to help me build an airtight case. I need every single piece of evidence documented, verified, and ready for both criminal and civil court. I want him in prison, and I want every penny returned to my mother's estate." Andrew nodded slowly. "I'll need a few days, maybe a week. We'll need to subpoena bank records, get expert testimony, and build the timeline. But Daniel, your mother? Does she know? I shook my head. She's too weak. The stress would kill her faster than the cancer. I can't tell her that her own brother did this. Not yet. Then we work fast, 'cause time isn't on our side. For the next week, I lived a double life. During the day, I was at the hospital with my mom, pretending everything was normal. Uncle Richard would come by, and I'd force myself to be civil, to smile, to act like I didn't know he was a thief and a monster. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Every time he touched my mother's hand, every time he called her sis with that fake affection in his voice, I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to grab him by the throat and make him confess. But I didn't. Because I knew that revenge served cold is revenge served best. And I was going to freeze him out completely. At night, I worked with Andrew and his team. We subpoenaed bank records and found the accounts where the stolen money had been transferred. We hired a forensic handwriting expert who confirmed that the signatures on the transfer documents were forgeries, good forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. We pulled security footage from my mother's building and found video of Uncle Richard entering her office late at night when no one else was around. We found records of him accessing her safe, her files, and her computer. We discovered that he'd been planning this for years. That he'd been slowly positioning himself, gaining access, learning the systems. And then the moment my mother got sick, the moment she was too weak to notice, he'd strike. But he'd made mistakes. Criminals always do. He'd gotten greedy and moved too fast. He'd transferred too much too quickly. He'd left a trail that a smart lawyer could follow, and Andrew Chen was a very smart lawyer. We have enough, Andrew told me on day 6. We can file both criminal charges and a civil lawsuit. The district attorney's office will definitely prosecute this. It's fraud, forgery, exploitation of a vulnerable adult, theft on a massive scale. He's looking at serious prison time.
How much time?
20 years, maybe more. And that's if he's lucky. I nodded slowly. Do it. File everything. But I want to be there when they arrest him. I want to see his face when he realizes he's been caught. Andrew hesitated. Daniel, I understand you're angry, but maybe it's better if I need to see it, I said quietly. I need to watch him lose everything the way he tried to make my mother lose everything. I need to see justice happen with my own eyes. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. I'll make the call. The arrest was scheduled for a Friday morning. The police agreed to do it at the office, at my mother's company, where Uncle Richard thought he was untouchable. Where he thought he'd won, I got to the building early and waited in the lobby. Andrew was with me, along with 2 detectives from the Financial Crimes Unit. We had a warrant. We had evidence. We had everything we needed. And then, at exactly 9:15 in the morning, Uncle Richard walked through the front doors. He was smiling. Actually smiling. Carrying his briefcase, wearing an expensive suit that I now realized he'd probably bought with my mother's stolen money. He looked like a man who didn't have a care in the world. He saw me standing there and his smile faltered. Just slightly, Danny, he said carefully. What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at the hospital? Mom's stable this morning, I said. My voice was calm. Cold. I wanted to talk to you about something. About the business. His eyes narrowed. What about it? About the transfers. The account changes. The properties that have been sold over the last 3 months. I watched the color drain from his face. Watched him calculate how much I knew, how much danger he was in. I don't know what you're talking about, he said slowly. Those were all legitimate business, Detective Morrison. I said quietly. The 2 detectives stepped forward. Badges out, Richard Thompson, one of them said. You're under arrest for fraud. Forgery, theft, and exploitation of a vulnerable adult. You have the right to remain silent? What? No, this is insane. I didn't do anything. Uncle Richard's voice was rising, panic flooding his features. He looked at me with something like hatred. You little bastard. You think you can do this? You think you have any right? I have every right, I said quietly. She's my mother. And you stole from her while she was dying. You forged her signature. You drained her accounts. You betrayed her in every possible way. You can't prove anything. Andrew stepped forward, holding a thick folder. Actually, we can. We have bank records. We have video footage. We have handwriting analysis. We have testimony from multiple witnesses. And we have these." He pulled out the transfer documents. "Every single one of these signatures is a forgery. And every single one of these transfers is going to be reversed." Uncle Richard's legs seemed to give out. The detectives caught him as he stumbled, and I watched as they put the handcuffs on his wrists. Watched as the man who had called me not family realized that his entire world was collapsing. "You don't understand," he was saying, his voice breaking now. "I needed that money. I had debts. Bad investments. I was going to lose everything. She wasn't going to live much longer anyway, and I just needed to steal from your dying sister." I stepped closer, my voice like ice. "You needed to betray the woman who gave you everything? Who saved you when you had nothing? Who trusted you with her life's work?" He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw him clearly. Not as my uncle, not as family, but a stoic he really was. A weak, greedy, pathetic man who had sold his soul for money. "She's going to know," I said softly. "Before she dies, I'm going to tell her what you did. I'm going to show her every document, every transfer, every lie. And she's going to die knowing that her brother, the person she loved and trusted, was nothing but a thief." "No," he whispered. "Please, don't tell her. Don't," but the detectives were already leading him away. His voice echoed through the lobby as he was taken out in handcuffs. And I stood there watching him go. Andrew put a hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" I took a deep breath. "Not yet, but I will be. The civil case will take a few months, but we'll get everything back. Every penny. The criminal trial will be faster with this much evidence. He'll probably take a plea deal to avoid the maximum sentence." "I don't want him to take a deal," I said quietly. "I want him to go to trial. I want everything he did exposed in public. I want everyone to know what he is." Andrew nodded. "Then that's what we'll do." The hardest part wasn't the arrest. It wasn't the legal battle. It was going back to the hospital and telling my mother what her brother had done. I waited 3 days. I wanted to have all the facts, all the evidence. I wanted to be able to show her that justice was happening, that he was being held accountable, that her life's work would be protected. But I was terrified. Terrified that the stress would make her worse. Terrified that she would die believing her brother had betrayed her. Terrified that I was taking away the one thing she had left her faith and family. But she deserved the truth, and I wasn't going to let her die without knowing that I had fought for her. I went to the hospital on a Monday afternoon. She was awake, alert for once. The doctors had adjusted her pain medication, and she seemed more present than she had been in weeks. "Daniel," she whispered, smiling weakly when she saw me. "My boy." I sat down next to her bed and took her hand. It felt so fragile, so small. This woman, who had built an empire, was now just bones and skin, her strength drained by disease. "Mom," I said softly, "I need to tell you something. About Richard." Her smile faded. "Where is he?" "He hasn't visited in days. He's in jail, Mom. He's been arrested." I watched confusion cross her face. "Arrested? For what?" And then I told her everything. I showed her the documents, the transfers, the forged signatures. I explained how he'd systematically stolen from her, how he'd betrayed her trust in every possible way. I watched her face go, through every emotion, disbelief, shock, heartbreak, and finally, a kind of terrible understanding. "How much?" She whispered. $45 million. Everything. He tried to take everything. Not for the money, I realized, but for the brother she thought she knew, for the family she thought she had. "I should have seen it," she said, her voice breaking. "I should have known." "No," I said firmly. "This isn't your fault. You loved him. You trusted him. You gave him every chance. He's the one who chose to betray that." She was quiet for a long time, and then she squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "Did you get it back?" she asked. "The money? We're getting it all back. Every penny. And he's going to prison for a long time." She nodded slowly. "Good, that's good." She looked at me with clear eyes. "You did that? You figured it out?" You fought for me? Of course I did. You're my mother. You're everything to me, but Richard said you weren't, that you weren't really family. I felt my throat tighten. He was wrong. I'm exactly where I belong. With you, and I always will be. She smiled then. A real smile, sad but proud. You're stronger than I ever was, Daniel. You're exactly the man I hoped you'd become. We sat together for a long time after that, not talking, just being mother and son, the only family that mattered. The trial happened faster than anyone expected. Uncle Richard's lawyers tried to negotiate a plea deal, but I'd meant what I said. I wanted everything exposed in open court. The prosecutor was happy to oblige. The case was too good, the evidence too solid. It was the kind of case that made careers. I attended every day of the trial, sat in the front row, and watched as witness after witness testified. Handwriting experts, bank officials, security personnel, even some of Uncle Richard's old business associates who confirmed he'd been in financial trouble for years. And then I testified. Told the jury about finding the documents, about my mother lying in a hospital bed while her brother stole her life's work, about the moment he told me I wasn't family. I watched Uncle Richard the entire time. He couldn't look at me, couldn't meet my eyes. Just sat there with his head down, knowing he was finished. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts, the judge sentenced him to 18 years in federal prison. No parole eligibility for at least 12 years. And he ordered full restitution, every penny returned to my mother's estate, plus penalties and legal fees. When the bailiffs led him away in handcuffs, Uncle Richard finally looked at me, and the hate in his eyes was matched only by the complete defeat. I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No triumph. Just a cold sense of finality. Justice had been served. And that's all that mattered. My mother lived for 3 more months after the trial. 3 months where she knew that her legacy was secure, that the company she'd built would survive, that the brother who'd betrayed her was paying for his crimes. But more than that, she spent those 3 months with me. We talked about everything. Her life, her regrets, her hopes for my future. She told me stories I'd never heard before. Shared wisdom she'd learned over decades of fighting and surviving and building. She made me promise that I would take over the company, that I would run it with integrity, that I would never let greed or ambition turn me into what Richard had become. And I promised. Because how could I not? After everything she'd done for me, after the example she'd set, how could I be anything other than the man she'd raised me to be? She died on a Tuesday morning, quietly, peacefully, with me holding her hand. The doctors said she'd held on longer than anyone expected. They said her will to live had been remarkable. But I knew the truth. She'd held on long enough to see justice done, long enough to know that I would be okay, long enough to say goodbye the right way. At her funeral, hundreds of people came. Business associates, employees, people whose lives she'd touched over the years. They all had stories about her kindness, her strength, her integrity. Uncle Richard wasn't there, of course. He was in a cell, and he would be for a very long time. His name was never mentioned. It was like he'd never existed, because in the end, that's what happens to betrayers. They're erased, forgotten. Their names become warnings rather than legacies. My mother's name? Her name became a foundation. I took the company she'd built and turned it into something even bigger. I used part of the recovered funds to establish a scholarship program for young people from poor backgrounds. Kids like my mom had been giving them the chance to build something great. Every building we develop, every property we acquire, every business deal we make, it's all in her honor. It's all carrying forward the legacy she created. So what did I learn from all of this? What's the moral of a story about betrayal and revenge and stolen millions? I learned that family isn't about blood. It's about loyalty, about sacrifice, about being there when things get hard. Uncle Richard was blood, but he was never family. Not really, because family doesn't steal from you when you're dying. Family doesn't forge your signature to rob you blind. Family doesn't tell your son he's not really family just to cover their own crimes. I learned that evil often wears a familiar face, that the people who hurt us most are usually the people we trusted most. That betrayal doesn't come from strangers, it comes from the people who know exactly how to hurt us because we let them in. But I also learned that justice, real justice, is possible, that the truth always comes out eventually, that greed and betrayal have consequences, no matter how well you think you've covered your tracks. My uncle thought he was so smart, thought he'd gotten away with the perfect crime. But he forgot one crucial thing. He forgot about me. He forgot that while he was busy stealing, someone was watching. Someone who loved their mother enough to fight back. The revenge I got wasn't about violence. It wasn't about destruction for its own sake. It was about truth, about exposing someone for what they really were, about making sure that the person they'd hurt was protected, even after they were gone. And that's the thing about real revenge. It's not hot and passionate and impulsive. Real revenge is cold, calculated. It's about dismantling someone piece by piece with facts and evidence and the law. It's about winning in a way they can never come back from today. I run my mother's company. I've doubled its value, tripled its impact. Every success is a tribute to her. Every building with her name on it is a reminder that she won, that we won. Uncle Richard sits in a prison cell, probably thinking about all the money he briefly had, all the things he could have bought, all the life he could have lived if he hadn't been so greedy, so cruel, so stupid. But mostly I hope he thinks about what he lost. Not the money or the freedom, but the family, the love, the legacy he could have been part of if he'd just been honest, if he'd just been good. Because in the end, that's what matters. Not how much money you have, not how clever you think you are, but how you treat the people who trust you, how you honor the people who love you. My mother taught me that. Even in death, even after being betrayed by her own brother, she taught me what really matters, and spend the rest of my life proving that she was right. That family, real family, isn't about blood. It's about love. It's about integrity. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything. That's her legacy. And I'm going to make damn sure it lives forever. So to anyone watching this who's been betrayed, who's been stolen from, who's been told they're not good enough, or not family enough, or not worthy enough by people who should have protected them, fight back. Not with anger, not with violence, but with truth, with evidence, with the law. Because you deserve justice. You deserve to be protected. And the people who hurt you deserve to face the consequences of their actions. My uncle learned that lesson the hard way, and he's got 18 years to think about it. As for me, I wake up every day and go to work in the company my mother built. I make decisions based on the values she taught me. And I know without a doubt that she's proud of me because I didn't just inherit her money or her business. I inherited her strength, her integrity, her refusal to let evil win. And that's worth more than $45 million. That's worth everything. Thank you for watching. And remember, family is what you make it. Choose wisely.